The coffee was cold, the customer was furious, and 22-year-old Kayla Martinez was about to make a choice that would change her life forever. She had no idea that the man screaming at her newest coworker was actually testing her character, or that her decision to stand up to him would lead to an offer that seemed too good to be true. What started as just another terrible shift at Mel's diner was about to become the opportunity of a lifetime. But first, she had to find the courage to speak up when everyone else stayed silent. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting their harsh glow across the worn linoleum floor of Mel's diner. It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, and Kayla Martinez wiped down the same section of counter for the third time, her tired eyes scanning the nearly empty restaurant. The late shift at Mel's wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and at 22, with student loans breathing down her neck and rent due next week, glamour was a luxury she couldn't afford. The bell above the door chimed, and Kayla looked up to see a man in an expensive-looking gray suit walk in. He was tall, probably in his early 50s, with sultan pepper hair and the kind of confident stride that spoke of someone accustomed to being in charge. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and his watch caught the light as he moved, clearly worth more than Kayla made in several months. He chose a booth in the corner, sliding into the red vinyl seat with the practiced ease of someone who had eaten in countless diners before. "I'll take this one," Kayla called to her coworker, a 19-year-old named Lucy who had started just 3 days ago. Lucy was still learning the ropes, her hands shaking slightly every time she carried a tray, her voice barely above a whisper when she took orders. The girl reminded Kayla of herself when she first started, nervous and eager to please, terrified of making mistakes. But Lucy was already walking toward the man's table, order pad clutched in her trembling hands. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Mel's. Can I start you off with something to drink?" The man looked up from his phone, his eyes cold and calculating. "Coffee. Black. And make sure it's hot this time. The last place I went, they served me lukewarm dishwater." Lucy nodded quickly, her pen hovering over the pad. "Yes, sir. Hot coffee. Would you like to hear about our late-night specials?" "I'll decide when I'm ready," he said curtly, not looking at her as he returned to his phone. "Just get the coffee." Lucy hurried away, her face flushed with embarrassment. Kayla watched her pour the coffee with extra care, checking the temperature twice before walking back to the table. The man was still on his phone, speaking in low, intense tones about quarterly reports and board meetings. Lucy stood beside the table for a full minute, coffee pot in hand, waiting for him to acknowledge her presence. "Excuse me, sir," Lucy finally whispered. "Your coffee?" The man looked up, irritation flashing across his features. "You've been standing there like a statue. Just put it down." Lucy set the cup down carefully, her hands trembling slightly. A few drops of coffee splashed onto the saucer, and the man's expression darkened immediately. "Look at this mess," he said, his voice rising. "Can't you do anything right? This is exactly the kind of incompetence that's ruining customer service in this country." "I'm sorry, sir," Lucy stammered, pulling out a napkin to clean up the small spill. "I'll clean that right up." "Don't touch it," the man snapped. "You've done enough damage. Get me a new cup, and this time, try to act like you've held a coffee pot before." Lucy's eyes were beginning to water, but she nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, right away." As she hurried back to the coffee station, Kayla felt her jaw tighten. She had watched enough new employees get broken down by difficult customers, and she recognized the signs. Lucy was about to cry, her confidence shattered by a man who seemed to take pleasure in making others feel small. The bell chimed again, and 2 more customers entered, a young couple who looked like they were coming home from a night out. They took a booth near the window, holding hands across the table and speaking in low, affectionate tones. Kayla grabbed menus and walked over to them, forcing a smile despite her growing anger at the man in the corner. "Good evening, folks. What can I get you started with?" The couple was easy to serve, polite and patient, as they decided between the late-night menu options. But even as Kayla took their order, she kept glancing toward the corner booth, where Lucy was setting down a fresh cup of coffee, with the precision of someone trying very hard not to make another mistake. "Finally," the man said, not looking up from his phone. "Was that so difficult?" Lucy started to turn away, but he held up a hand. "Wait, I'm ready to order now. But I want you to write this down exactly as I say it, because I don't want any mistakes." Lucy fumbled for her pen, her hands shaking visibly now. "Yes, sir. I'm ready. I want the meatloaf special, but I want the green beans replaced with corn, the mashed potatoes replaced with rice, and the gravy on the side. The meat should be well done but not overcooked, and I want the corn to be fresh, not frozen. Can you handle that, or should I speak more slowly?" The condescension in his voice was like a physical blow. Lucy's face crumpled slightly, but she nodded and scribbled frantically on her pad. "Meatloaf special, corn instead of green beans, rice instead of potatoes, gravy on the side, well done meat, fresh corn. And make sure the kitchen doesn't mess this up," the man added. "I don't have time to send food back because your staff can't follow simple instructions." Lucy practically ran to the kitchen, and Kayla watched her lean against the prep counter, taking deep breaths to steady herself. The cook, a grizzled man named Frank who had worked at Mel's for 15 years, looked up from his grill with concern. "You okay, kid?" "I'm fine," Lucy whispered, but her voice cracked on the words. Kayla felt something burning in her chest, a familiar anger that reminded her of every time she had been made to feel small, every moment when someone with power had used it to hurt rather than help. She had been Lucy once, new and scared and desperate not to lose a job she needed. She remembered the crushing weight of humiliation, the way it could make you feel like you were nothing. The man in the corner was still on his phone, speaking loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. "I don't care what the shareholders think. If they can't handle the heat, they shouldn't be in the kitchen. We're not running a charity here." His words were sharp, cutting, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who had never had to worry about where his next meal was coming from. Kayla watched Lucy in the kitchen, saw the girl's shoulders shaking as she tried to hold back tears, and felt her resolve crystallize into something hard and unbreakable. She had two choices. She could keep her head down, do her job, and let Lucy learn the hard way that some customers were just terrible people who had to be endured. Or she could do something about it. The decision was easier than she expected. Kayla walked over to the corner booth, her heart pounding but her steps steady. The man was still on his phone, gesturing animatedly as he spoke about market projections and competitive advantages. He looked up when she approached, his expression annoyed at the interruption. "Can I help you?" he asked, covering the phone with his hand. "Actually, I think I can help you," Kayla said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm the senior waitress here, and I couldn't help but notice you're having some issues with our service." The man's eyebrows rose slightly. "Your new girl nearly spilled coffee all over my suit, and she can barely take an order without falling apart. If that's the kind of service you call acceptable, then yes, I'm having issues." Kayla felt her temper flare, but she kept her voice level. "Lucy is new, and she's learning. Everyone makes mistakes when they're starting out. But the way you're treating her isn't helping anyone." "Excuse me?" The man's voice was dangerously quiet. "Are you seriously lecturing me about how to behave in a restaurant? I'm telling you that there's no excuse for treating another human being like they're worthless," Kayla said, her voice growing stronger. "Lucy is doing her best, and your best isn't making her job easier. It's making it harder." The man ended his phone call and leaned back in the booth, studying Kayla with new interest. "And what exactly are you suggesting I do about it?" "I'm suggesting you treat her with basic human decency," Kayla replied. "She's not your employee, and she's not your punching bag. She's a person trying to do her job, and she deserves respect." The restaurant had gone quiet. The young couple near the window was watching with wide eyes, and Frank had emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. Lucy stood frozen by the coffee station, her face pale with shock and terror. The man in the suit smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Let me get this straight. You think you have the right to tell me how to behave because some incompetent girl can't do her job properly? I think I have the right to stand up for my coworker when someone is being unnecessarily cruel," Kayla said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. And I think you have the ability to be better than this. Better than what, exactly? Better than someone who gets their kicks from making teenagers cry, Kayla said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. Better than someone who mistakes power for permission to hurt people. The man's smile faded. He studied Kayla for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. You're willing to risk your job for someone you barely know? If standing up to a bully costs me my job, then it's not a job worth having, Kayla said, surprised by her own conviction. But I don't think it will. Because most people, when they really think about it, don't want to be the kind of person who makes others feel terrible for no reason. The silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Kayla could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, could see Lucy's terrified face out of the corner of her eye, could sense Frank ready to step in if things got out of hand. Then, without warning, the man stood up. He threw a $20 bill on the table, more than enough to cover the coffee he had barely touched, and looked at Kayla one last time. Interesting, he said quietly. Then he turned and walked out, leaving the bell above the door chiming in his wake. The restaurant erupted in whispers as soon as he was gone. The young couple was talking in excited, hushed tones, and Frank was shaking his head with a mixture of admiration and concern. But Kayla barely heard any of it. She was focused on Lucy, who was standing by the coffee station with tears streaming down her face. Hey, Kayla said softly, walking over to her. Are you okay? Lucy nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I thought I was going to get fired. I thought you were going to get fired. I can't believe you did that. He was being a jerk, Kayla said simply. Nobody deserves to be treated like that. But he was a customer, Lucy whispered. The customer is always right, isn't that what they say? Kayla thought about that for a moment, remembering all the times she had swallowed her pride, bitten her tongue, and let difficult customers walk all over her because she needed the job. The customer is always right about what they want to order, she said finally. But they're not always right about how to treat people. Lucy smiled through her tears. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stepped in. You would have figured it out, Kayla said. You're tougher than you think. The rest of the shift passed quietly. The young couple left a generous tip and complimented Kayla on her handling of the situation. Frank made Lucy a sandwich to take home, grumbling about customers who don't know how to act decent while secretly beaming with pride at Kayla's courage. As Kayla cleaned the last table and counted her tips, she found herself thinking about the man in the expensive suit. There had been something odd about the whole encounter, something that didn't quite add up. The way he had studied her during their conversation, the strange smile, the almost casual way he had left after throwing down money for a meal he hadn't ordered. But she pushed the thoughts away. Some customers were just strange, and she had more important things to worry about than trying to figure out the psychology of a rude man in an expensive suit. The next morning, Kayla woke up to her phone buzzing insistently on her nightstand. She grabbed it groggily, expecting to see a text from her roommate or maybe a reminder about her afternoon classes. Instead, she saw 7 missed calls from her manager, Robert, and a text that made her blood run cold. Need to see you ASAP. Coming early. Important. Kayla's stomach dropped. She had known there was a chance that standing up to the customer might have consequences, but she had hoped that Robert would understand. He was a good manager, fair and supportive, but he also had a business to run, and a district manager to answer to. She threw on her uniform and drove to the diner, her mind racing with possibilities. Maybe the man had called to complain. Maybe he had threatened to sue. Maybe he was someone important, someone with connections who could make trouble for the restaurant. The parking lot was almost empty when she arrived, which was unusual for a Wednesday morning. Mel's was typically busy during the breakfast rush, but today there were only 2 cars in the lot, Robert's beat-up Honda and a sleek black sedan she didn't recognize. The bell chimed as she entered, and she saw Robert standing behind the counter with an expression she couldn't quite read. He looked nervous, excited, and confused all at once. "Kayla," he said, his voice oddly formal. "Thank you for coming in. There's someone here who wants to meet you." That's when she saw him. The man from the night before was sitting in the same corner booth, but he looked different somehow. His posture was more relaxed, his expression warmer. He was wearing a different suit, navy blue instead of gray, and he had a briefcase on the table beside him. "You," Kayla said, her voice flat. "I should have known you'd be back to cause more trouble." The man smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Please, sit down. I think we need to talk." Kayla looked at Robert, who nodded encouragingly. "It's okay, Kayla. Just hear him out." Still suspicious, Kayla slid into the booth across from the man. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she had initially thought, maybe late 40s instead of early 50s. His eyes were intelligent and sharp, but there was something kind in them that hadn't been there the night before. "My name is David Crane," he said, extending his hand across the table. "I owe you an apology." Kayla stared at him without taking his hand. "An apology for what? Being rude to a teenage girl who was just trying to do her job?" "For deceiving you," David said quietly. "Last night wasn't real. I mean, it was real, but it wasn't what you thought it was." "I don't understand." David leaned back in the booth, his expression thoughtful. "I'm the CEO of Crane Industries. We own restaurants, hotels, retail chains, technology companies, hundreds of businesses across the country." Kayla's eyes widened. Crane Industries was huge. What of those conglomerates that seemed to have their fingers in everything? She had seen their logo on everything from coffee shops to electronics stores. "Last night," David continued, "I was conducting what we call a character assessment. We do them at businesses we're considering for partnership, acquisition, or investment. I come in disguised as a difficult customer to see how the staff responds under pressure." "You were testing us," Kayla said, her voice hollow. "I was testing the establishment," David corrected. "But what I found was you." "What do you mean?" David opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Kayla Martinez, 22 years old, psychology major at State University, working part-time to pay for school. No family money, no connections, no safety net. Just intelligence, determination, and apparently an unshakable moral compass." Kayla felt a chill run down her spine. "You investigated me?" "I had my people do some basic research after last night," David admitted. "I wanted to understand who you were, what motivated you to risk your job for a stranger. And what did you find?" David smiled. "I found exactly what I was looking for." He pulled a document from the folder and slid it across the table. "This is an offer letter for our Rising Leader program. It's a mentorship initiative I started 5 years ago to identify and develop people with exceptional leadership potential." Kayla stared at the document without picking it up. "I don't understand. You're offering me a job because I was rude to a customer?" "You weren't rude," David said firmly. "You were brave. You saw someone being treated unfairly, and you did something about it. You risked your livelihood to stand up for your principles. That's not something you can teach in business school." "But I could have handled it better," Kayla said. "I could have been more diplomatic, more professional." "You were professional," David replied. "You were firm, but respectful. Direct, but not aggressive. You gave me multiple opportunities to change my behavior before you escalated. That shows judgment and restraint." Kayla finally picked up the document, scanning the details with growing disbelief. "Full-time position. Starting salary of $85,000. Comprehensive benefits. Mentorship program. Relocation assistance. The program lasts 2 years," David explained. "The first year, you'll work directly with me and my executive team, learning every aspect of business operations. The second year, you'll rotate through different divisions to find where your interests and talents align. After that, you'll have your choice of positions at any of our companies." "This is insane," Kayla whispered. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," David said. "I know you're willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. I know you can think on your feet and articulate your position clearly. I know you're not intimidated by authority when you believe someone is being wronged." "But I'm just a waitress," Kayla said. "I don't have any business experience." "Neither did I when I started," David replied. "I was a mechanic's son from Ohio who got lucky with a small restaurant franchise. Everything I know about business, I learned by doing it. What I can't teach is character. and you have that in abundance. Kayla looked around the diner, at the familiar surroundings that had been her world for the past 2 years. Robert was pretending to clean the coffee machine, but she could see him watching a conversation with intense interest. "I don't understand why you do this," she said finally. "The testing, I mean. Why not just interview people normally?" David's expression grew serious. "Because people can fake anything in an interview. They can memorize answers, present carefully crafted versions of themselves, say whatever they think you want to hear. But when someone thinks they're dealing with a real situation, with real consequences, that's when you see who they really are." End quote. "And who am I?" "You're someone who puts principles before profit," David said. "Someone who stands up for the vulnerable, even when it costs you something. Someone who believes that how we treat each other matters more than following arbitrary rules." Kayla felt tears prick at her eyes. "But what if I'm not good enough? What if I fail?" "Then you'll learn from it and try again," David said simply. "That's what business is, Kayla. It's a series of problems to solve, and the best leaders are the ones who can adapt, learn, and maintain their integrity while they do it." "Why me?" Kayla asked. "I mean, really, why me? There have to be hundreds of people who would have done the same thing." David shook his head. "In 5 years of conducting these assessments, you're only the 3rd person who stood up to me. Most people just ignore it, or they complain to their manager later, or they give me exactly what I want to avoid conflict. You're the only one who confronted me directly and tried to change my behavior." End quote. "What happened to the other 2? "One is now a regional manager for our hotel division. The other started her own company with our investment and is doing very well." Kayla stared at the offer letter, her mind reeling. "I need time to think about this." "Of course," David said. "But I should mention that part of the program involves relocating to our headquarters in Chicago. The position comes with a full relocation package, including housing assistance and moving expenses." "Chicago," Kayla repeated. She had never lived anywhere but her small hometown. The idea of moving to a major city was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I know it's a lot to consider," David said. "But I want you to know that this offer is genuine. We're not looking for someone to fit into our existing culture. We're looking for someone to help us improve it. Can I ask you something?" "You," Kayla said. "Anything. Last night, when you were being so awful to Lucy, did any part of you feel bad about it?" David considered the question carefully. "Yes," he said finally. "I hated every minute of it. But I've learned that sometimes you have to be willing to be the villain in someone else's story to find the heroes in your own." "That's a terrible way to think about it," Kayla said. "You're right," David agreed. "Which is exactly why I need people like you around to keep me honest." Robert approached their table, looking nervous. "Kayla, I don't want to interrupt, but I thought you should know that word has gotten around about last night. We've had 3 different people call this morning asking about you." "Asking about me?" "The couple that was here last night told their friends about what you did. People are saying you're some kind of hero." Kayla felt her cheeks burn. "I'm not a hero. I just did what anyone should do." "That's exactly what makes you a hero," David said quietly. "Heroes don't think they're heroes. They just do what needs to be done." Robert cleared his throat. "Mr. Crane, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is this offer legitimate? I mean, no offense, but it seems almost too good to be true." David reached into his briefcase and pulled out a business card. "Call this number and ask for Jennifer Walsh. She's my executive assistant. She'll confirm everything and answer any questions you have." He turned back to Kayla. "I'm flying back to Chicago tonight, but I'll be here until 5 o'clock. If you decide you're interested, we can discuss the details. If not, there are no hard feelings. And if I say yes, then you'll start Monday morning," David said. "We'll have an apartment ready for you, and Jennifer will coordinate all the moving arrangements." "Monday? That's in 5 days." "I know it's fast," David said. "But opportunities like this don't come along often, and frankly, I think you're ready for a challenge." After David left, Kayla sat in the empty diner with Robert, trying to process what had just happened. The offer letter lay on the table between them, looking both surreal and terrifying. "What do you think?" Robert asked. I think I'm dreaming, Kayla said. Things like this don't happen to people like me. What do you mean, people like you? Kayla gestured around the diner. I work at Mel's, Robert. I live in a one-bedroom apartment with a roommate who leaves dirty dishes in the sink for weeks. I drive a car that's older than I am. I'm nobody special. You stood up to a customer who was being cruel to a teenager, Robert said. You risked your job to do what was right. That sounds pretty special to me. But what if I'm not smart enough? What if I don't know how to act around important people? Robert smiled. Kayla, you just spent an hour talking to one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, and you treated him like anyone else. I think you'll be fine. But this is my life, Kayla said, looking around the diner again. This is what I know. And it will always be here, Robert said gently. But maybe it's time to find out what else you're capable of. Kayla spent the rest of the day in a daze, mechanically going through the motions of her classes while her mind raced with possibilities and fears. She called her parents, who were supportive but worried about her moving so far away. She talked to her roommate, who was excited and jealous in equal measure. But it was Lucy who helped her make up her mind. The girl had come in for her evening shift, and when she heard what had happened, she grabbed Kayla's hands with tears in her eyes. You have to take it, Lucy said. You have to. Why? Because you saved me last night, Lucy said. Not just from that awful man, but from thinking that I had to let people treat me badly to keep my job. You showed me that it's okay to expect better. But I'll be leaving you here, Kayla said. Who's going to look out for you? Lucy smiled. I'll look out for myself. You taught me that I can. At 4:30, Kayla found herself standing outside the hotel where David was staying. She had changed clothes 3 times, practiced what she was going to say, and nearly turned around twice. The Lucy's words kept echoing in her mind. David was waiting for her in the lobby, still in his navy suit but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. He looked tired but hopeful. I was hoping you'd come, he said as she approached. I have questions, Kayla said. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. They sat in comfortable chairs near the window, and Kayla pulled out a notebook where she had written down her concerns. What happens if I hate it? What if I'm terrible at it? Then we'll figure out together why it's not working and how to fix it, David said. This isn't a pass-fail situation, Kayla. It's a learning opportunity. What about school? I'm 3 semesters away from graduating. We'll work around your class schedule, and the company will pay for you to finish your degree. We have partnerships with several universities in Chicago. What exactly would I be doing? David leaned forward. For the first few months, you'd be shadowing me and my executive team. Sitting in on meetings, observing how decisions are made, learning about different aspects of the business. Then you'd start taking on small projects with lots of support and guidance. And after 2 years, you'd have options. You could join our management training program, start your own division, work in our nonprofit arm, or even start your own company with our backing. The goal is to help you find where your talents and interests align. Kayla looked down at her notebook, at all the careful questions she had prepared. But there was only one that really mattered. Do you really think I can do this? David's expression grew serious. Kayla, in 30 years of business, I've met a lot of people. Some were brilliant, some were connected, some were ruthless. But the ones who succeeded, really succeeded, were the ones who combined intelligence with integrity. You have both. But what if I mess up? Then you'll join a very large club, David said with a smile. I've made more mistakes than I can count. The difference between successful people and everyone else isn't that they don't make mistakes. It's that they learn from them and keep going. Kayla closed her notebook and looked out the window at the town she had lived in her entire life. It was safe, familiar, predictable, but it was also limiting. She thought about Lucy, about the courage it took to stand up to someone who seemed more powerful than you. She thought about all the times she had wondered what she might be capable of if she had the chance to find out. I want to try, she said quietly. David's face broke into a genuine smile. I was hoping you'd say that. But I'm terrified, Kayla admitted. Good, David said. The people who aren't scared are usually the ones who don't understand what they're getting into. They spent the next hour going over the details. David's assistant would call her in the morning to coordinate the move. The company would pay for professional movers. And she would have a furnished apartment waiting for her. Her salary would start immediately, and she would have full benefits and a mentor assigned to help her navigate the corporate world. One more thing, David said as they prepared to leave. I want you to know that this isn't charity. We're not doing this to be nice. We're doing this because we believe you can contribute something valuable to our organization. What if I can't? Then we'll both learn something, David said. But I don't think that's going to happen. As Kayla drove home that night, she felt a mixture of excitement and terror that she had never experienced before. She was leaving everything she knew to pursue an opportunity that seemed almost too good to be true. But for the first time in her life, she was betting on herself. The next few days passed in a blur of packing, paperwork, and goodbye dinners. Her parents were proud but worried. Her friends were excited and envious. And her professors were supportive, but reminded her that she could always come back to finish her degree if things didn't work out. But it was her last shift at Mel's that really hit her. Robert had organized a small party with the CS staff, and even some of the regular customers stopped by to wish her well. Frank made her favorite sandwich, and Lucy presented her with a card signed by everyone. "Thank you," Lucy said as Kayla prepared to leave, "for everything. Thank you for reminding me why it was important to speak up," Kayla replied. On Sunday night, Kayla stood in her empty apartment, 2 suitcases and a box of personal items at her feet. Tomorrow, she would get on a plane to Chicago, where a driver would meet her and take her to her new apartment. On Monday morning, she would walk into the offices of Crane Industries and begin a new chapter of her life. She thought about the conversation that had started it. All about a scared teenager and a cruel customer and a choice that had seemed simple at the time. She wondered if she would have made the same decision if she had known what would come of it. The answer, she realized, was yes. Because the choice hadn't been about consequences or rewards. It had been about doing what was right, regardless of the cost. And that, more than anything else, gave her confidence that she was ready for whatever came next. Monday morning in Chicago dawned bright and clear, and Kayla stood in front of the gleaming Crane Industries building, her heart pounding with nervous energy. She was wearing a new suit, purchased with her signing bonus, and carrying a briefcase that still felt foreign in her hands. The lobby was all marble and glass, filled with people in expensive clothing moving with purpose and confidence. Kayla felt like Camaress, an imposter, like someone had made a terrible mistake, and she would be found out at any moment. But then she remembered Lucy's tears, and the way the girl had looked at her with such gratitude. She remembered her own words about standing up for what was right, regardless of the consequences. She straightened her shoulders and walked to the elevator. David was waiting for her on the 42nd floor, and his smile was warm and genuine. "Ready for your first day?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Kayla replied. "Perfect," David said, "because the best leaders are the ones who know they still have everything to learn." As they walked down the hallway toward the executive offices, Kayla caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of a window. She looked different, more confident, more purposeful, but underneath the new clothes and the unfamiliar surroundings, she was still the same person who had stood up to a bully in a small-town diner. And that, she realized, was exactly who she was supposed to be. The story of Kayla Martinez was just beginning, but it was built on a foundation of integrity, courage, and the belief that how we treat each other matters more than any rule or profit margin. In a world that often seemed to reward the wrong things, she had chosen to be right, and that choice had changed everything. 6 months later, Kayla would be leading a team of executives in developing new customer service protocols based on empathy and respect. A year later, she would be featured in a business magazine as one of the rising stars in corporate leadership. And 2 years later, she would start her own nonprofit organization, funded by Crane Industries, dedicated to providing leadership training for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. But all of that was still in the future. For now, she was just a young woman who had learned that sometimes the most important choices are the ones we make when we think no one is watching, and that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of it. The elevator doors opened, and Kayla stepped forward into her new life, carrying with her the lessons learned in a small-town diner and the unshakable belief that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, is always worth it. As she walked into the boardroom for her first executive meeting, Kayla thought about Lucy, who was still working at Mel's, but had been promoted to shift supervisor after showing remarkable leadership skills. She thought about Robert, who had called her the night before to tell her how proud he was. She thought about Cree, her parents, who had driven to Chicago the previous weekend to see her new apartment and couldn't stop marveling at how far their daughter had come. But mostly, she thought about the moment when she had made a choice to stand up for someone who couldn't stand up for herself. It had seemed like such a small thing at the time. Just a few words spoken in defense of basic human dignity. But those words had revealed something about her character that she hadn't even known existed. Something that had caught the attention of a man who made his living finding extraordinary people in ordinary circumstances. The meeting was intimidating at first. Kayla sat at a table with vice presidents and directors, people with decades of experience and advanced degrees from prestigious universities. But as the discussion progressed, she found herself contributing ideas, asking questions, and offering perspectives that no one else had considered. When David asked her what she thought about their customer service training program, Kayla didn't hesitate. "I think we're focusing too much on policies and procedures, and not enough on empathy," she said. "You can teach someone to follow a script, but you can't teach them to care about people. And if they don't care, the script doesn't matter." The room fell silent for a moment, and Kayla wondered if she had overstepped. But then David smiled. "Can you elaborate on that?" "Ooh. When I was working at Mel's, we had a manual that told us exactly how to handle difficult customers," Kayla said, her confidence growing. "But the manual didn't tell us how to recognize when someone was having the worst day of their life and just needed someone to be kind to them. It didn't tell us how to see the difference between someone who was genuinely upset and someone who was just trying to get something for free." End quote. She paused, thinking about all the customers she had served over the years. "The best interactions I had weren't the ones where I followed the rules perfectly. They were the ones where I treated people like human beings first and customers second." David nodded slowly. "And how would you translate that into corporate training?" "I'd start by hiring people who already have empathy," Kayla said. "Then I'd train them to use it effectively. Role-playing exercises where they practice dealing with different types of difficult situations. But more than that, I'd create a culture where employees feel empowered to make decisions based on what's right, not just what's written in the manual." End quote. The discussion continued for another hour, with Kayla finding herself at the center of a conversation about reshaping how the company approached customer relations. By the end of the meeting, she had been assigned to lead a task force on developing new training protocols. As the executives filed out of the room, David lingered behind. "How do you feel about your first day so far?" "Terrified and exhilarated," Kayla admitted. "But mostly grateful." "For what?" "For the chance to be here. For the opportunity to make a difference. For learning that sometimes the scariest choices are the ones that lead to the best outcomes." David smiled. "You know, when I started this program, I thought I was looking for people who could learn to be leaders. But I've realized that what I'm actually looking for are people who are already leaders. They just don't know it yet." "And you think I'm one of them?" "I think you proved that the night you stood up to me," David said. "Leadership isn't about having authority over people. It's about being willing to do what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Over the following weeks, Kayla threw herself into her new role with the same determination she had brought to every challenge in her life. She attended meetings, shadowed executives, and worked on her task force project with a passion that impressed everyone around her. But the real test came when she had to present her customer service recommendations to the board of directors. These were the people who ultimately controlled the company's direction, and they were not easily impressed. Kayla had prepared extensively, but as she stood in front of the boardroom full of powerful executives, she felt the same nervousness she had experienced on her first day. Then she remembered Lucy's face that night at the diner, remembered the way the girl had looked, when she thought she was going to lose her job for making a simple mistake. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kayla began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I want to tell you about a 19-year-old girl named Lucy who taught me the most important lesson I've ever learned about customer service." She told them about that night at Mel's, about watching a new employee being reduced to tears by a customer who seemed to enjoy causing pain. She talked about the choice she had made to intervene, and how that choice had revealed something fundamental about leadership and human nature. "The question isn't whether our employees can follow procedures," Kayla said. "The question is whether we're creating an environment where they feel empowered to treat people with dignity and respect, even when those people don't seem to deserve it." She outlined her recommendations: hiring practices that prioritized emotional intelligence over just technical skills, training programs that focused on empathy and conflict resolution, and most importantly, a company culture that supported employees who made difficult choices in service of doing what was right. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Then the chairman of the board, a stern woman in her 70s who had built her reputation on being tough but fair, began to clap. The rest of the board joined in, and Kayla felt a surge of pride and relief. "Ms. Martinez," the chairman said, "that was one of the most compelling presentations I've heard in my 30 years on this board. When can we start implementing these changes?" The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Kayla's recommendations were approved and implemented across all of Crane Industries' customer-facing businesses. She traveled to different locations, training managers and employees on the new protocols, and everywhere she went, she saw the same transformation. Employees who had been going through the motions began to take pride in their work. Customer satisfaction scores improved dramatically. And most importantly, the company began to attract and retain the kind of people who genuinely cared about others. But the moment that meant the most to Kayla came 6 months into her tenure, when she received a package at her Chicago apartment. Inside was a letter from Lucy, along with a photograph of the girl receiving an award for Employee of the Month at a new restaurant where she had been hired as an assistant manager. "Dear Kayla," the letter read, "I wanted you to know that I got promoted again. The manager here says I have natural leadership abilities and that I'm not afraid to stand up for what's right. I learned that from you. Thank you for showing me that I could be more than I thought I was. I hope you're doing amazing things in Chicago. I know you are." End quote. Kayla sat in her apartment, looking out at the city skyline, and felt a profound sense of completion. She had taken a risk, left everything she knew, and bet on herself in a way that had seemed impossible just a year earlier. But more than that, she had learned that the choices we make ripple outward in ways we can't always see. Lucy was thriving because someone had stood up for her. The employees at Crane Industries were happier and more engaged because someone had advocated for a more humane approach to customer service. And Kayla herself had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed because someone had seen her potential and been willing to invest in it. The story could have ended there, with Kayla successful in her new role and grateful for the opportunity she had been given. But life, as she was learning, has a way of presenting new challenges just when you think you've figured things out. The call came on a Tuesday morning in her second year with the company. David's assistant informed her that there was a situation at one of their newly acquired properties, a small chain of diners in the Midwest, and that David wanted her to handle it personally. "What kind of situation?" Kayla asked. "Employee complaints about management practices," the assistant said. "The kind of thing you've become our expert on." Kayla flew to Ohio the next day, expecting to find the usual problems: poor training, unclear policies, managers who didn't know how to handle difficult situations. What she found instead was something much more familiar and much more troubling. The restaurant was almost identical to Mel's, from the red vinyl booths to the black and white checkered floor. But the atmosphere was different, tense and unhappy in a way that reminded Kayla of her worst days in the service industry. She sat in the back booth, dressed in ordinary clothes and carrying herself like just another customer, and watched the staff interact with each other and with the patrons. What she saw made her stomach turn. The manager, a middle-aged man with the kind of artificial smile that never reached his eyes, was treating the employees like servants rather than people. He snapped at them for minor mistakes, criticize them in front of customers, and seemed to take pleasure in making them feel small and insignificant. It was like watching her own story in reverse, like seeing what her life might have been like if no one had ever stood up for her. The breaking point came when she watched the manager reduce a young server to tears over a spilled drink, berating her in front of a dining room full of people with the same casual cruelty that David had shown Lucy that night at Kai Mel's. But this time, there was no one to intervene. The other employees kept their heads down, afraid to speak up. The customers pretended not to notice. And the young server, a girl who couldn't have been more than 18, stood there absorbing the abuse because she needed the job and didn't know she had any other choice. Kayla felt the familiar anger rising in her chest, the same righteous fury that had driven her to confront David 2 years earlier. But this time, she wasn't just a waitress defending a coworker. She was a corporate executive with the power to actually change things. She stood up and walked to the counter, her heart pounding with the same mixture of fear and determination she had felt that night at Mel's. The manager looked up at her with his practiced customer service smile. "Can I help you, miss?" "Actually," Kayla said, pulling out her business card, "I think I can help you." The manager's face went pale as he read the card. "Ms. Martinez?" he stammered. "I didn't know you were coming." "That was the point," Kayla said calmly. "I'm here to observe your management practices, and I have to say, I'm not impressed." "There must be some misunderstanding," the manager said, sweat beading on his forehead. "We run a tight ship here. High standards, professional service." "What I saw was a grown man humiliating a teenager for making a simple mistake," Kayla said, her voice carrying the same quiet authority she had developed in the corporate boardroom. "That's not professional. That's bullying." The restaurant had gone quiet, just as Mel's had that night 2 years earlier. The young server was staring at Kayla with the same mixture of shock and hope that Lucy had shown. "I want to see all of your employee files," Kayla continued. "I want to review your training procedures. And I want to talk to your staff, individually and without you present." The manager nodded frantically. "Of course, whatever you need. But first," Kayla said, turning to the young server, "I want to apologize to this young lady on behalf of the company. The way you were just treated is unacceptable, and it's not going to happen again." The girl's eyes filled with tears, but they were different tears than the ones she had shed moments earlier. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of someone who had been drowning and suddenly found a lifeline. "Thank you," she whispered. "What's your name?" Kayla asked. "Sarah," the girl said. "Sarah, I want you to know that you did nothing wrong. Mistakes happen, and they're opportunities to learn, not reasons to be humiliated." Kayla spent the next 3 days at the restaurant, conducting interviews, reviewing policies, and observing the dynamics between staff and management. What she found was a toxic culture built on fear and intimidation, where employees were afraid to speak up, ask questions, or even make suggestions. But she also found something else, a group of people who genuinely cared about their work and their customers, who were being held back by a system that punished initiative and rewarded conformity. On her last day, Kayla called an all-staff meeting. The manager had been quietly dismissed that morning, and the employees were nervous about what would happen next. "I know you're all wondering about your jobs," Kayla began. "Let me put your minds at ease. Nobody is being fired, but things are going to change." She outlined the new policies she was implementing: respectful communication between all staff members, training programs focused on professional development rather than just rule following, and most importantly, a clear channel for employees to report crass problems without fear of retaliation. "But the most important change," Kayla said, "is cultural. We're going to create an environment where everyone feels valued, where mistakes are learning opportunities, and where treating people with dignity isn't just a nice idea, it's a requirement. It's a requirement." Sarah raised her hand tentatively. "What if we see someone being treated badly? What are we supposed to do?" Kayla smiled, remembering her own fear and uncertainty in that moment 2 years earlier. "You speak up," she said. "You stand up for each other, You remember that how we treat people matters more than any rule or policy. But what if the person being mean is a customer? Another employee asked. Then you handle it professionally but firmly, Kayla said. You don't have to accept abuse from anyone, customer or coworker. We'll teach you how to set boundaries while still providing excellent service. As the meeting broke up, Sarah approached Kayla with tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said. I was ready to quit before you came. I thought all jobs were like this. They're not, Kayla said firmly. And they shouldn't be. You deserve better than what you were getting. Flying back to Chicago, Kayla found herself thinking about the circular nature of her journey. She had started as someone who needed protection, had learned to protect others, and was now in a position to create systems that would protect people she would never meet. But the real revelation came when she walked into David's office the next morning and found him waiting with a familiar smile. How did it go? He asked. It went well, Kayla said. But I have a question for you. Shoot. Did you know what I would find there? David leaned back in his chair. I suspected. We've been getting complaints, and the numbers suggested problems with employee turnover and customer satisfaction. So you sent me because you knew I'd handle it the right way? I sent you because you understand what it feels like to be powerless, David said. And because you remember what it meant when someone stood up for you. Kayla nodded slowly. It wasn't a coincidence, was it? You choosing that diner in my hometown, testing us that night. There are no coincidences in business, David said. I had been watching that location for months, considering it for acquisition, when I heard about a young woman who was working her way through college and had a reputation for standing up for her coworkers. I knew I had found what I was looking for. You investigated me before you ever walked into Mel's, Kayla said. I investigated everyone, David replied. But you were the only one who passed the test. And if I hadn't stood up to you that night, then I would have moved on to the next candidate, David said. But I had a feeling you wouldn't disappoint me. What gave you that feeling? David smiled. Your manager, Robert, told me about the time you helped an elderly customer who had fallen in the parking lot. You stayed with him until the ambulance came, even though it meant missing your break and getting behind on your tables. When I asked you about it later, you couldn't understand why anyone would think that was noteworthy. Because it wasn't, Kayla said. It was just the right thing to do. Exactly, David said. And that's what made you perfect for this program. As Kayla left David's office, she felt a profound sense of gratitude mixed with a new understanding of her own journey. She had thought she was just a waitress who got lucky, but she was beginning to see that luck had very little to do with it. The choices she had made, the values she had held on to, the willingness to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult, these weren't accidents. They were the result of who she was, shaped by her experiences and her determination to be better than her circumstances. That evening, she called her parents to tell them about her trip to Ohio. As she described the situation she had found and the changes she had implemented, she could hear the pride in their voices. We always knew you were special, her mother said. Even when you were little, you couldn't stand to see anyone being treated unfairly. I remember when you were 8, her father added. And you got in trouble at school for defending a kid who was being bullied. You came home with a black eye and a detention slip, but you weren't sorry about it. Kayla smiled. I had forgotten about that. We hadn't, her mother said. That's when we knew you were going to do something important with your life. Later that night, Kayla sat in her apartment and wrote a letter to Lucy, telling her about her trip to Ohio and the young server who reminded her so much of both of them. She wrote about the importance of standing up for each other, about the ripple effects of courage, and about the responsibility that comes with having the power to make things better. But mostly, she wrote about gratitude. Gratitude for the opportunity to make a difference, for the people who had believed in her, and for the moment of courage that had changed everything. 2 years later, Kayla Martinez stood in front of the graduating class at State University, delivering the commencement address as a successful business executive and the founder of a nonprofit organization dedicated to leadership development for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. She looked out at the sea of faces, at young people who were about to enter the workforce with dreams and fears and uncertain futures, and she thought about the choices they would face. The most important decisions you'll make, she told them, won't be about your career or your salary or your title. They'll be about who you choose to be when you think no one is watching. They'll be about whether you stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. They'll be about whether you use whatever power you have to lift others up or to tear them down. She paused, thinking about a night 2 years earlier when she had faced exactly that choice in a small-town diner. "I want to tell you about a girl named Lucy," she began, and she saw some of the graduates lean forward, ready to hear a story about courage and consequence, about the power of doing what's right even when it's scary. As she spoke, Kayla caught sight of her parents in the audience, their faces glowing with pride. Next to them sat David Crane, who had flown in specifically to hear her speak. And in the back, wearing a cap and gown because she had finally finished her degree, was Lucy herself, now a successful restaurant manager who had driven 5 hours to be there. The story had come full circle, but it wasn't ending. It was just beginning again, with a new generation of young people who would face their own moments of choice, their own opportunities to stand up for what was right. And maybe, if they were lucky, they would find the courage to be the person they were meant to be. Just as Kayla had that night when she decided that a scared teenager deserved better than the cruelty of a stranger. The applause was thunderous, but what meant the most to Kayla was the look in the graduates' eyes. They were inspired, energized, ready to go out into the world and make a difference. After the ceremony, as she was surrounded by well-wishers and congratulations, Kayla felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find a young woman, probably around Lucy's age, with nervous eyes and a determined expression. "Ms. Martinez," the girl said, "I wanted to thank you for your speech. I start my first job next week, and I was scared about whether I'd be able to handle difficult situations. But you've shown me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right anyway." Kayla smiled, remembering her own fear and uncertainty, and the way David's unexpected opportunity had changed everything. "What's your name?" "Jessica," the girl said. "Jessica, I want you to remember something. The world needs people who will stand up for what's right. It needs people who will speak up when they see injustice. It needs people like you." "But what if I'm not brave enough?" "Bravery isn't something you're born with," Kayla said. "It's something you choose, moment by moment, decision by decision. And the more you choose it, the easier it becomes." As Jessica walked away, looking more confident than she had moments before, Kayla felt the familiar sense of completion that came from helping someone discover their own potential. The story of the waitress, who stood up to a rude customer, had become legend in the business world, told and retold as an example of how character reveals itself in unexpected moments. But for Kayla, it was just the beginning of a lifetime of choosing courage over comfort, of using her voice and her power to make the world a little bit better. And somewhere in a small town, in a diner very much like Mel's, another young person was facing their own moment of choice, their own opportunity to stand up for what was right. The story would continue, as it always does, with ordinary people making extraordinary choices, proving that heroism isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It's about seeing someone who needs help and deciding to help them, regardless of the cost. That night, as Kayla sat in her apartment, looking out at the city lights, she thought about the path that had brought her here. From a small-town waitress, to a corporate executive, to a voice for change, all because she had been willing to stand up for a scared teenager who reminded her of herself. The journey had been unexpected, challenging, and ultimately transformative. But it had started with a simple truth that she had learned early and never forgotten. How we treat each other matters, and when we have the power to make things better, we have the responsibility to use it. In the end, that was the real lesson of her story. Not that good things come to those who wait, or that virtue is always rewarded, but that courage is contagious, that standing up for what's right creates ripples that spread far beyond what we can see. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, those ripples come back to us in the form of opportunities we never could have imagined. Chances to be more than we thought we could be, and the profound satisfaction of knowing that we used our moment of choice to make the world a little bit better. The story of Kayla Martinez was complete, but the impact of her choices would continue for generations, inspiring others to find their own courage, to stand up for their own principles, and to remember that the most important moments of our lives are often the ones when we choose to do what's right, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult.